What's up everyone, Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Nick, and I'm back with some underrated albums. I haven't done one of these in a while, and I don't know, kind of just had the itch to do it, and this time instead of going after something very specific, like a certain type of a certain style, just gonna do some flat out death metal. I kind of just want to do some death metal because I love death metal. Pretty much, I think everyone knows that by now. That, and I figured since the weather is pretty much shit here right now, like it's mostly just rain, but it's a fucking lot of rain. Like my backyard is a fucking swamp right now. Really don't want to go out. Why not record a video? Sounds like way more fun. So once again, I have 10 albums here that I think are underrated, maybe overlooked in discographies a little bit, or just kind of buried in the underground, and I wanted to cover them. So let's get into this one. God Dethroned, The Christhunt. It's their 1992 debut album, and honestly, I think it's one of the most different ones in their entire discography. This is just raw, nasty, old school death metal, very close to Swedish death metal too. Like there is a kind of HM2 tone to it, and everyone knows I'm a giant slut for that. And this is before the more blackened elements started creeping into their sound. This is, again, kind of the most different one in their entire discography because it is so raw, and honestly, it kind of sounds like a totally different band at this point. Like you go later in their discography, this is kind of unrecognizable in terms of God Dethroned. Now, I have to say, I don't like the intro. What is it? Necrosapiens, which Based did it a lot better with their song called that. This is just kind of goofy. It sounds like Muppets engaged in gladiatorial combat. I think Sweetums and Animal were the winners in the end, but it's just kind of goofy. But once you get down to the music, Jesus Christ, this might be their heaviest offering. They're a little bit more along the lines of like atmospheric now, or maybe more melodic, like melodic death metal and black metal, but this is just bone-crunching fucking heavy. This is somewhere between like Entombed and like Floridian death metal, like Deicide and Cannibal Corpse, especially the track God Dethroned. That has some flat-out Cannibal Corpse style riffs in the breakdown on that. But this is just evil sounding and also brutal. I kind of like that nice little balance. The production's nice and raw. Hordes of Lucifer might be one of my favorite tracks on here. I think the songwriting on that is really fucking good. And there's spots of melody on here, but mostly this is just about brutal fucking old school death metal, and kind of makes this one stand out in their discography again. And if you love old school death metal and you like HM2 stuff, but you also like a little bit of that Floridian sort of thrashy sound, definitely check this out. I think this is possibly one of the more overlooked ones in their discography. I mean, they put out a lot of albums, and I know their whole series of albums that were based around World War II were really popular. I really dig them, but I don't know, I find myself coming back to this one quite a bit more. If you've never checked it out, I strongly recommend it. Good stuff. Trigger the Bloodshed, Degenerate. This is the third album from this UK death metal slash tech death band. Came out in 2010, and honestly, this is their most recent offering, so this band's kind of been MIA for a while. Now, might be a reason. Their drummer, Dan Wilding, is actually the drummer of Carcass, and, well, I mean, as much as they don't necessarily put out albums as often, I imagine it's still pretty much a busy gig. Now, I will say that this band kind of started off as more of a deathcore act, I guess. Or at least they kind of got lumped in that pack a lot, but with every release, more of the deathcore sound got stripped out to the point where this is just raw, brutal, technical death metal. This isn't like breakdown a minute deathcore at all. This is blast beats, intricate riffing, very brutal fucking vocals on here. Actually, I would draw a lot of comparisons to bands like Hideous Divinity, Our Penance, Aborted. Like it's that sort of high octane, very blast beat driven death metal. I would say this sounds like a lot of stuff that, well, might be on Unique Leader at this point. Well, kind of. I mean, Unique Leader kind of signs a fair amount of deathcore bands that aren't as good, at least in my opinion, but in terms of the more brutal death metal side, kind of sounds similar to this. I think the songwriting here is pretty solid. There's not much of a lead guitar presence at all, but they kind of make up for it with like memorable groovy sections, especially Hollow Prophecy. And I love the bending riffs that are in D Breed especially. This is just flat out brutal, and honestly, I kind of like all their stuff. I mean, even the more deathcore-ish, like, it was kind of on that cusp. I think it was still a little bit more death metal, but I guess you could make an argument that it was deathcore. I still like that. I think they were a really solid band, and for whatever reason, things just didn't seem to get going for them, and they've been on hiatus for a long period of time now. So I don't know, I'm kind of curious if these guys do get back together, or if that on hiatus is just not been updated to, yeah, we broke the fuck up a while ago. I don't know, but I would like to hear more from this band because I think this is a really solid album. And if you like brutal as fuck technical death metal, strongly recommend it. Check it out. Neraxis, The Thin Line Between. This is the 5th release from this Quebec-based tech death act. Unfortunately, they've been defunct for a number of years now, but I was a huge fan of them, and this was probably the release that made me a huge fan of them. Right away, the opening track, Darkness Prevails, has some unbelievably catchy fucking riffs. I love the lead work on here. The music is technical as hell, but it's very accessible. There are loads of big hooky sections, and that is kind of something that I feel can be absent in a lot of tech death. These guys like to write catchy riffs. It isn't just noodling all the time, and the music isn't so overtly technical to the point where it loses accessibility, I guess. I had the pleasure of seeing these guys at a very odd show. First off, it was in a roller rink, and there was no alcohol served because it was a family center, whatever. It was in Westland, Michigan, and it was the Faceless Veil of Maya, Abigail Williams, Decrepit Birth, and Neuraxis. And Neuraxis was the opening band, I believe, and they were flat out fucking amazing. I was already a fan of them, but seeing them live, oh my god, they fucking nailed it. And they played a lot of stuff off of this because I believe this might have been what they were promoting, because the last album, which was the follow-up to this, had not come out yet. I really latched on to this one. I mean, I like all their stuff, but I think this has some of their most creative riffing. The song Versus has some incredible melodies on there that are almost kind of comparable to Mastodon a little bit, but again, with that more technical flair. And again, the lead work on here, scorching. Every lead. Very intricate, really cool phrasing, lots of melody. And of course, with tech death, you have to have solid drumming, and the drum work on here, very comparable to Flow from Cryptopsy. Lots of really cool, like, interesting fills, little off-time stuff. This is just a flat-out badass album, and when it comes down to technical death metal, Quebec is kind of a cool fucking hub for it, and this is, I think, one of the gems that came out of that entire scene, honestly. If you've never checked this out, I strongly recommend this one. I recommend all their albums. Honestly, Neuraxis has just badass albums throughout. Like, the early ones are a little bit more raw, but I think this is pretty much where it came together. But the one before it's really good, and the one after it's really good. This is the central piece, at least as far as I'm concerned. Definitely check this out. And again, just check out all their stuff. They're just a badass band. Nerve Cell, Psychogenocide. This is the second album from this Dubai-based death metal / death thrash act. I gotta say, it's probably tough being a death metal act in Dubai. I know, like, UAE is a little bit more lenient in terms of censorship, but that's, like, more lenient compared to, like, Iran, which is not lenient, so it's still not very lenient. So I imagine when it comes down to subject matter, you really gotta watch your ass. But this is a fucking killer album. I picked this up on a whim, namely because it was on Unique Leader at the time in 2015. I was definitely buying up a lot of stuff on that label, and holy shit, this is a fucking riff fest. There's a lot of Morbid Angel worship, but it switches back and forth between, like, killer, catchy, thrashy riffs here and there. Loads of triplet chugs, big fucking grooves. I love the songwriting on here, and of course they employ some of that Middle Eastern atmosphere just to sort of spice up a little bit. The production's great. The energy on here is pretty much just non-stop. Like, this is just high energy pretty much throughout the entire release. And an interesting thing about this band is they don't have an actual drummer. They just use session drummers. And on this one, the session drummer was Dave Haley from Psychroptic, so they fucking bagged a killer drummer, and of course the drum performance on here is fucking awesome. I have to say the title track is one of my favorites. Flat out fucking Triplet City. There's a really cool Drury instrumental in here, and I can't quite remember what track it was, but I liked it. I wrote it down. I just forgot to write down the track. My bad. Also, The Nation's Plague. One of the catchiest riffs on the entire album. Now, I believe these guys are still around. I actually have the follow-up to this, which was also really good, but I went with this one because this is where I started, and they have one album before this, which I don't own. I believe they're still around. I believe they're still making music, and I would definitely love more because I hadn't listened to this one in a while, and holy shit, this just flat out whoops ass pretty much from start to finish. If you've never checked out these guys and you like your death metal very thrashy and very riffy, recommend it. Awesome stuff. Under the Church, Supernatural Punishment. This is the second album from this Swedish/Icelandic death metal group. Features current and ex-members of General Surgery, Nirvana 2002, and Continuum. And I think you guys heard me gush about these guys in collection updates before. I'm a big fan of them. This is some raw HM2 inspired punky death metal. High energy pretty much across the board. Again, that punk energy kind of comes through, so there's loads of D beats. There's also thrashy sections. It's a very crispy tone too. Like there's a little bit of like extra gain to it, so I think it snarls a little bit more. The vocals are nice and mid-range, and I think they're very intelligible too, which is really cool. It reminds me a lot of Ben from Goat Whore, actually. And honestly, they kind of pepper in a little bit of death and roll on here. Like it's a little bit on the title track especially, but honestly, like listening to the title track and hearing those more death and roll riffs, it kind of has a little bit of that Wolverine blues sort of dirty rock and roll sleaze to it, and that just makes it more fun because honestly, this is just pretty much pure fun. Most of this is just about attitude and, well, I don't like probably like zombies and shit, but it kind of carries throughout of that sort of punky bite to it. But it's not all piss and vinegar. They do get doomy in the last track, Silence of the Shadows, which really love the melodies on that, and the just nasty doomy riff on there is just catchier than hell. Really dig these guys. I mean, again, I probably gushed about them in other collection updates. I was a huge fan of their new EP, which just fucking ripped from start to finish. This is a badass album too. This is where I started, and I've picked up every album since from these guys. So yeah, I'm definitely a fan. And honestly, if you like your death metal kind of punky, thrashy, and a little bit sleazy, you might like them too. So definitely check these guys out. All their releases I think are really good, but this is where I started. So check this one out and then check out all the other shit because it's all good. Infernal Legion, The Spear of Longinus. This is the third album from this Washington-based death metal act. Came out in 2011 on Morebound Records, or at least that's who it was reissued through. It might have actually come out on that label. They don't put out much here lately. Now I know looking at this album cover, this looks like blackened death metal. In fact, you know, if you took a quick glance at it, you're like, oh my god, I don't have that Archgoat release. It's not Archgoat. This is a band that just looks like they have their album covers. But I will say that I'm 100% certain that these guys love Deicide, because Deicide is kind of all over here, at least in terms of the core sound. But honestly, this album had a lot of surprises. I hadn't revisited this one in a while, and I was kind of shocked by some of the melodies on here. The song The Immaculate Deception kind of sounds like early In Flames, like Jester Race. There's like little bits of melodic death metal. But these melodies are for Satan, not for whatever the hell In Flames we're talking about. But that was kind of the cool thing, like this could flip back and forth between absolutely fucking Deicide levels of brutality to, well, I mean, something actually really pretty, like in terms of a melody, namely the song Black Blood. It kind of pivots back and forth between that. Now, I do have some issues with this. It's namely the mix. The guitars might be too loud because they kind of end up drowning out other stuff. Like the vocals get buried, occasionally the drums even get buried. And this guitar tone's good. It's just too fucking loud. And another thing is, while this music does get far more adventurous than I thought it would, the vocals kind of stay flat. Like occasionally you get like a good high-low sort of variant, but most of the time it's just kind of a, well, it kind of sounds like Glenn Benton. I mean, Glenn Benton's not the best vocalist out there, but you know, he's pretty good. But one of my complaints is sometimes like his low growl gets really static. That kind of happens here. And honestly, that was kind of a thing that made this album kind of lose steam at the end, because you hear more variety in the music, you just don't hear it in the vocals, and that would probably be one of the things that, and kind of, you know, turning down the guitars just a little bit so we can hear everyone else in the band, kind of made it stagnate. But overall, this is a pretty solid album. I am not entirely sure this band is still around, but if they are, I wouldn't mind checking out more of their stuff, because this is just a vicious release with some surprisingly catchy melodies on it. Not enough to call it melodic death metal, that is for damn sure, but this is a good balance. And if you dig your brutality with a little bit of melody, and if you like Deicide, definitely check these guys out. Lago Sea of Duress. It's the second album from this Phoenix-based death metal act. This came out in 2018 on Unique Leader. And honestly, if you listen to this, it does not sound like a typical Unique Leader release. This is way more old school death metal, lots of Morbid Angel kind of incantation vibes. There's loads of atmosphere on here, and again, an old school vibe. This does not sound like the bulk of Unique Leader's signings, and that really made this stand out. This was actually almost on my year-end list for 2018. Now, it's interesting that the frontman and guitarist Cole Jacobson is a former member of Fluids and Structure of Lies, which again are both like just way more just death metal centric. Like, it does not scream like the brutal death metal that you would hear on Unique Leader or the deathcore for damn sure. And the love of all things old school really shows in here. The production, while it is a little bit cleaner, just has that old school sort of 90s death metal feel, and the riff work on here is absolutely amazing. This keeps this dark, dreary, evil feel pretty much throughout. And with the very deep vocals and those really cool dissonant tags and the ends of riffs and the odd structure, you definitely get some big Immolation vibes on there, which if an album gives me Immolation vibes, I'm generally gonna like it. And while this isn't black metal, like at all, or blackened death metal, it definitely has a very dismal, evil feel to it, especially the last track, Providence. But one of my favorites on here is Broken Barrier. That has a triplet chug on there that is so fiercely Morbid Angel, it might as well have been Morbid Angel. This album, and I think this band in general, just seems to float on the underground, and I don't know, like maybe this was just the wrong label for this album, because I don't know if it was really promoted very well. But I feel like a lot of people may have slept on this band, and I actually jammed the singles, and I was, again, kind of shocked it was on Unique Leader, because this sounds almost more like a $20 spin signing. So that's sort of gritty, evil shit. But I believe this band is still around. Hopefully they are working on a follow-up to this absolute fucking banger of an album, and I hope it is just as good, if not better, because this album is a gem. Kind of just overlooked, and hopefully I've done a good job teasing this one and enticing you guys to check this out, because this is a flat-out banger of an album. Front to back, it just whoops ass, and you should check it out. Impious, Death Domnination. This is, well, the most recent album from them, and this came out in, what, 2009? Been a minute. This is the only non-melodic death metal offering from this Swedish band, and I was a little shocked when I picked this up. Pretty much everything else they put out is straight up melodic death metal, very much in the vein of bands like, again, In Flames, At the Gates, maybe a little bit on the thrashy side like The Haunted, but this, very different. And I was, again, kind of shocked when I picked it up, because I popped it in and I was greeted to blast beats, more guttural vocals, more aggressive riffing. This is just a flat-out death metal album. And while I think the vocals were always kind of aggressive, like, these really come off as just in your face, and coupled with the shift in style, yeah, dude, this is a brutal fucking album that I really did not see coming. I was a big fan of the album before this, Holy Murder Masquerade, which I think is an absolutely awesome album. It's just solid melodic death metal. And while this does have some, you know, nice melodic sections on here, especially in I Am the King, there's some really killer melodies on there. This is just full tilt, like hyper aggressive. Like, I don't know what the hell happened in the studio or with the band meetings or whatever. It's like, yeah, let's just make a flat out death metal album and really just kind of catch our entire fan base off guard. And I don't know, that might have been an issue there, because I don't know if this album really did very well, but me being a fan of just death metal in general, I really dug it, and I think it really stands out in their discography, and it's a pretty solid album. In terms of making a transition to a far more aggressive style, they did a great fucking job. The songwriting is tight. There is some extra atmospheric stuff like the Industrial Beginning to and the Empire Shall Fall, but holy shit, the breakdowns in that fucking song are ungodly heavy. And across the board, the drum work is fast as shit. This is very similar to, like, you know, the high octane shit you hear on like an album by The Crown. And of course, the main thing I love, riffs. The opening to Dead Awakening, very Morbid Angel-y, very dark and sinister. Pretty much across the board, this is a fiercely intense listen. And Well, I don't know if it sat well with the fan base. Like, again, this was a huge shift in their sound overall. They were heavy before, but it was like melodic death metal heavy. This is more just straightforward death metal. Like, melody is not completely absent again, but again, very different than anything else in their discography. And this being their last release coming out over a decade ago, I don't know what happened in this band. I don't know if pretty much they just decided to split up after this one, or they've just been on hiatus. I don't know if they do shows anymore. I really just don't know what the hell happened to this band, and it sucks because I think they shifted in a direction that was also good. Not as though their earlier stuff wasn't good, but I think they excelled at changing their sound and doing it well. Like, this didn't come off as like a knee-jerk transition. They didn't sound as though they were uncomfortable with this new direction. This just flat out whoops ass. So, I don't know, hopefully these guys resurface and come back with something, well, like this, or even kind of like their older stuff. I liked either, but I kind of want to hear a continuation of this, because this was just fucking brutal as hell. If you have not checked out this one, well, no, it's definitely different than all their other ones, but I'd say check those out too. But yeah, if you want just the heaviest side of this band, it's this album. So definitely check it out. Illogicist The Insight Eye. This is the second album from this Italian-based tech death band. Came out in 2007, and this actually features Marco Miniman of, well, a lot of fucking bands. Absolutely amazing drummer, and he fucking kills it on here just because I think he just kills it in general. Again, dude's fucking amazing. Now, I got into these guys not long after jamming like bands like Necrophagist, I would say The Faceless, and Blotted Science. I wanted to hear more technical music that was done really well and incorporated a lot of melody, and this does that. Holy shit, I think this is one of my favorite tech death albums ever, honestly. One of my favorite things about this album is it's not just the blast beat fest and noodling and just, you know, the general wankery that you can find in tech death. This is about riffs, creative melodies, very interesting song structures. There's little bits of jazz fusion in here. This is almost kind of flirting with being progressive, but the death metal roots on here, it definitely makes it sound more tech death, and I think that's kind of where most people would put them. But this actually has some seriously killer hooks across the board on here. And that isn't just in the guitars. The bass work on here is fantastic. There's a distinct, like, cynic, later death sort of vibe in a lot of it. The syncopation in the song Brain Collapse, I absolutely love those crazy fucking breakdowns on there. But it does settle in like really cool grooves often. So this is very like headbangable. You don't have to like try to figure out every fucking time signature. You can just kind of groove along to it and still be amazed at all the insane shit that's being played. I think the mix is great on here too. It doesn't sound overproduced at all. It actually sounds just still kind of gritty, but it's not muddy. Of course, you want some clarity in the sound with all the intricate riffing. And honestly, I love all three of their albums, though this one is probably my favorite of the bunch. And well, it's the one I got into first, so that's kind of like the anchor point for this band, but I think all their albums are really good. Now, this band is currently on hold. I mean, I believe everyone involved is also in a lot of other projects, but I mean, Marco, definitely a very popular session drummer, and is one of those guys that if you get him in your band instantly got a fuckload better. But I really hope this band resurfaces, because they write some amazing fucking tech death. And again, it's hooky, it's intricate without being overtly too technical. It's not a blast beat fest. This is just really solid technical play and killer songwriting across the board. If you love tech death, there's a good chance you have heard of these guys, but if you haven't, I strongly recommend this album. I strongly recommend all three, but this is the one that made me a fan. And by that, I think it's a pretty solid gateway album into this band. So yeah, definitely check this one out. And finally, we have Living Sacrifice, Inhabit. So the third album from this band came out in 1994, and well, I got into them at a different point. I got into them around the Hammering Process, where they were maybe more groove metal, metalcore. Before that, they were a death thrash band. Their first self-titled album is fucking thrashier than hell. Like, it's almost more of a thrash metal album than a death metal album, but there's a lot of death metal elements on it. This is one of the albums where they really started to shift more towards death metal. The album before, Non-Existent, definitely showed more of a transition in death metal as well. The riffs became heavier. There's a little bit more of that Floridian sound. This is also before Bruce Fitzhugh took over on vocals. And yeah, the vocals are not great on here, once again. Those first 3 albums, while I love all the riffs, because I think they fucking wrote some disgustingly heavy music, the vocals are pretty bad. Like, this guy seems like he's having a hard time deciding between being a hardcore singer and a death metal singer, and it just doesn't necessarily work. But this is an album that I think is so good that I can get past the vocals because the riffs are just fucking snarly on here. This is a little bit more groovy than the earlier stuff. There's more breakdowns, and holy shit, it gets heavy. And honestly, I would compare a lot of this to like early Decapitated. Like, it's very chuggy, lots of palm muter riffs, lots of syncopation going on, and it is not bereft of melody. In fact, the title track in here is kind of loaded with killer melodies. I still have to say, I think this is very heavy for a very Christian band. I'm reasonably sure not only they were like listening to Slayer in secret, they were probably hiding some Morbid Angel albums too. So I don't know if they made like a secret pact with each other. It's like, listen, we're gonna put on this Morbid Angel album, but you know, our parents can't know, all right? We'll just say we're inspired by Striper. They'll believe it, right? I think some form of that conversation went on. But this is a sleeper of an album. Like, if you can get past the vocals, that's kind of an issue. The riffs, the flat-out brutality of this, and again, hearing the transition from their earlier stuff being a little bit more thrash to the heavier, more sinister death metal sound that started to really come out in the next 2. This makes for a solid listen. Again, minus the vocals. I kind of have to keep bringing them up because once you hear them, you're like, oh god, that's going to be tough to ignore. And it might be, but it's worth it. Just focus on the riffs, focus on the music, because this is a killer album just with, you know, bad vocals. So yeah, definitely check this out. I still need to get the second album, and that will pretty much almost complete everything for Living Sacrifice that they've put out. But that will be for another video. So for now, check this out. Alright, that knocks out another batch of underrated albums, and this was kind of fun to go back through. I kind of wanted to do more in the series. It's been a while since I'd actually done one of these. And of course, I do hope you guys find some killer stuff in here. I do plan on doing some more underrated albums. Again, I'm not sure where I'm going to go. I don't know, I might do thrash again. I haven't done thrash in a while. Thrash is fun. Yeah, maybe we'll do thrash. So, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you would like to help us out there will be a link down below. And shirts, as soon as we hear about them and are able to go pick them up, we will let you guys know and do a video showing off the new design, as well as throwing out something for a giveaway, because again, we're close to 10,000 subs, and holy shit, thank you guys. It is awesome doing this, and it's so amazing to see it grow. I'm so glad you guys have been along with us. This is so much fun to do, and I just want to keep doing it because, again, I'm having loads of fun. Hopefully you guys are having loads of fun, and hopefully you guys are finding a bunch of killer fucking music on this channel, because that is the main point. So once again, thank you all so damn much, and we will catch you later.